When you look at famously haunted houses or famously haunted hotels, you often find some kind of architectural quirk that I think plays into, that building's reputation.
What do you think our kind of fascination with ghosts, like what does that say about us?
So ghosts kind of help deal with grief. They help deal with our fear of death. I think they also kind of explain. I mean, for me, on like a fundamental level, they help explain weird architecture. Like we've all been in just kind of buildings that just felt weird or off, and that is just kind of a thing that's I tried to sort of put into words, but I find like a thing you come back to a lot of times.
I've never really thought about hauntings being kind of all about architecture.
It's so much of our lives is just spent in buildings, right? And over the years they're kind of adapted for kind of certain use habits, right? So one of the most basic things when I first started looking at like weird houses and sort of thinking about why these houses made me like uncomfortable is like, oh man, this house has like a bathroom off the kitchen. That's not where you put bathrooms. That's just weird. And I just started to notice that the houses that I was most predisposed to think of as haunted were often houses that were built or structured or arranged in such a way that just felt like non-standard and like off, and I think that, and when you look at famously haunted houses or famously haunted hotels, you often find some kind of architectural quirk that I think plays into, that building's reputation.
Growing up, my house had a bathroom in the kitchen. Right, I could picture it perfectly. Green and white tile floor with a bathroom in the kitchen.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, like when you think of like a haunted house, I'm guessing, 9 people out of 10 are going to think of a Victorian.
Yeah, I'm going to think of an old house.
So one of the things I came to the conclusion of is like, part of the reason a building comes to be haunted is because it outlives its moment, right? Like the Victorian that doesn't get torn down and just kind of persists because nobody needs to tear it down, but that's how it gets haunted. Or, the Kirkbride asylums, which is a kind of asylum built in the 19th century that were very popular and most cities had one, are these massive buildings and they're physically difficult to demolish. So even as the field of psychiatry changed and people decided, well, this is not how we want to institutionalize people anymore in this context, we're going to build new kind of more modern hospitals for people with mental health issues, you still have these buildings, right? You still have, and they're still stuck there. And so I think that a haunted building is one in many ways that has outlived its time. And that's going to change with time. There are buildings that we're building now that seem sort of on the, cutting edge of architecture and style that will probably be around in 100 years when, tastes and functionality have moved on, but will still be sitting there. And people probably want to think of them as haunted.
What would you consider to be the most haunted places in America?
What I can say is one of the places I went to was the Moundsville Penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia, which was an active prison from the mid 19th century until the 1990s. And was it haunted? I don't know, but without a doubt, one of the most bad vibes place I've ever been to in my life. Just taking a tour there, and some of that is just because it was built that way. It was built the sort of belief of kind of prison philosophy at the time was part of your sentence, part of the it wasn't just doing time. It was that you would be doing time in a place that was meant to invoke melancholy, so that you would be you would be made to sort of emotionally suffer as part of your prison sentence. And so prisons were built, and if you've been to the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, it's of that same era and that same model. Prisons were built to just make you feel bad physically. And so this place just had it had low ceilings, it had narrow walls, it was this big stone fortress. And it just felt bad to be there. And then you see these cells that were designed for 2 people, had 2 bunks on the wall, but they had, like, by the end of the prison's run in the 90s, they had 4 prisoners to a cell. So they would have one guy sleeping under the lower bunk on the floor and then another guy on a mattress in the middle of the room. And you just got the sense of just like this was a place built to generate bad vibes, and then it just got worse and worse over time. And that place just felt bad to be in. And, you know, I think, like, you could say, okay, that's Ghost. And certainly a lot of awful things happened there. A lot of people were murdered. A lot of terrible people who, you know, were terrible criminals did time there. You know, there was a like a corner that was used for executions, but that was definitely one of the, just like, the places that I just felt awful being there and kind of couldn't wait to get out.
Whichever way you kind of believe, whether these things are real or not really real, was there a place that made you feel the other way? Like, oh, I don't believe this, or I do believe this, but this place, that kind of made me feel differently.
Well, this is also in Ghostland, the one place that I came closest to seeing, for whatever it's worth, sort of definitive evidence, was I got hired by Maxim magazine to go write a feature about the owner of the brothel, the Mustang Ranch. And so I spent 3 days hanging out in the Mustang Ranch with the women who work there. And the feature never came out. They killed the feature. But while I was hanging out and I was just talking to Madam, she mentioned casually that the Mustang Ranch was haunted. And so, of course, I'm like, tell me more, you know. And, you know, she was describing the various things that she saw, or that, you know, people claim to see. And there was like one wing that, you know, people always saw ghosts in, and like the parking lot is haunted because some guy got shot there, and all this stuff. And like, the other thing while I was there was because I was, you know, trying to understand what it's like working in a brothel. And like, you know, I started to see, just for the women who work there, and I don't think this is that surprising, but just how psychologically, you know, emotionally difficult that job is. You know, I mean, like, to set aside the physical aspect, it's just, you know, I said at one point, I was like, it sounds like what you guys do is sort of like 90% emotional labor. And the women all said, no, it's 100% emotional labor. So it's this very emotionally taxing job. And when I was talking to Madam about the ghost, she said, you know, like, well, you know, a lot of times it's the girls who aren't really working out, who are really struggling, having a hard time with this job, you know, that see the ghosts. And so I said to her, I was like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. Maybe this is like, it's just a way of, like, you're under psychological pressure, and this kind of, you know, it manifests itself, you know, the stress and the anxiety manifests itself in like seeing ghosts. And maybe it's just a psychological thing. And she was like, no, I see them too. But then she grabbed this woman who was walking by, and she's like, hey, go get your camera, or go get your phone and show them the videos. So she comes back with this video of this woman. So this is outside of Reno, and this woman lives in Los Angeles, and she comes up for like a week or two at a time to work, and then goes back to LA. And she has a boyfriend, and so she sends her boyfriend videos while she's up there. And so she was recording this video for her boyfriend, and it's just her in like lingerie, just sort of like dancing in front of the camera. And there's this like glowing orb, like this little ball of light that obviously she can't see, but is visible in the video. And it's just sort of like fluttering around her head, and she pays no notice of it. And then like 30 or 40 seconds into the video, it goes off screen. It flies off screen. And then a couple seconds later, it like flies rushing back on screen. And the moment it hits her temple, she falls over in the video. It's really funny. And she, of course, like, she's just like, I don't know. At the time, I just thought I had lost my balance. And it wasn't until I looked at the video that I saw this orb. But she, you know, and I was like, wow, that's certainly a video I just watched. Yeah, so